Welcome, everyone, to another edition of Crew Call. Leo, Jack, E, Jonesy, and Sherm. And we want to thank, obviously, everyone out on the front lines and all the essential workers. We appreciate you doing what you do that allow us to be here and have a great discussion about betting on yourself. Fred VanVleet, out of Rockford, Illinois, Rockford's finest. He was not overly scouted in high school, although, he did catch the eye of Wichita State. And actually, by the end of his high school career, there were a few big school suitors that did come by and talk to him about potentially signing with them. Instead, he said, you know what? Wichita State, they're the ones that believed in me first. That's where I'm going. And then all of a sudden, here comes Fred VanVleet alongside Ron Baker. And boy, did they put Wichita State back on the map.
I would argue that Fred VanVleet and Ron Baker are one of the best college basketball backcourts we've seen in the last 20 to 30 years. You consider they had the number one team in the country. They went to a Final Four. I would say they're mid-major, high mid-major, somewhere in between that. And, the old line, you should always go a level below where everyone tells you to go. And I think the fit for Fred VanVleet from a developmental standpoint at Wichita State was perfect. He played for a coach in Greg Marshall that had a philosophy and a style of play that fit Fred, and Fred fit them. And to me, I too often, we get too caught up in the cookie-cutter version of what a player should look like. And maybe Fred VanVleet doesn't fit that cookie-cutter version. I think he fits a lot like a Kyle Lowry. And I would argue when you look at a guy like Fred VanVleet and you start historically looking at the NBA of guys that were undrafted and who were the best undrafted players to play in the NBA, so far the resume that Fred VanVleet's putting together, I tell you what, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it certainly is, Sherm, when you think about Fred VanVleet coming out of Wichita State, leading them to a Final Four, goes undrafted, and as soon as the draft ended, Raptors on the phone, and they said, hey, Fred, this is a place to be. From a development model standpoint, it fit perfectly.
Yeah, and that story kind of fit Fred's life. He was never the number one guy on anybody's list, but he was always a guy that when he got there, he changed everybody's mind about who he was as a player and a person, and this was no different. I mean, it's hard to go to a veterans camp and make a team. It's hard to get in there and convince an organization that you deserve one of their roster spots when those spots are so precious. And Fred did that. And he did that by being himself and understanding who he is and how he got there. There's a consistency to Fred. There's an effectiveness to what he does. There's a toughness to Fred, both physically and mentally. And there's also this understanding that the work is never done. He's never satisfied. He's always going at it. And to the point that Jack was making, look, he's in an era where the bigger guards are around now. There are bigger guys at the guard spot that organizations like. And Fred is a throwback to the smaller guard that could get the job done. And he's always swimming upstream. He's always going against the current because of his size, but he's always getting it done. And that's what I appreciate about him. There's a toughness, and we've used the word resiliency through many of these crew calls that we've had. But he's another guy that epitomizes what resiliency looks like.
Yeah, Leo, when you think about Fred VanVleet and his development and growth, you have the G League a part of it, just like Pascal Siakam, right? Just like so many of the Toronto Raptors that have had success, but yet the willingness, the drive, and then the ability of Fred VanVleet to figure out how he's going to fit in the NBA.
Well, two things based on everything we're saying here jump out at me. In that first training camp, I remember sitting with Jeff Weltman, assistant GM at the time, and I go, you can't get rid of this kid. I mean, you got to keep him. Because at that point, he was just a body of camp. Go, you have to keep him. He was going at Kyle Lowry like Kyle Lowry took his lunch money. He was going after him, right? And then you flash forward to what you're saying with the G League. And, you know, we've talked about this with other players like Pascal Siakam, that, you know, the G League isn't a demotion. It's an opportunity to develop. It's an opportunity to play your game, stay in shape, do what you have to do. And Fred embraced that opportunity. And something that, you know, one of the coaches told me early on in his career when he was going back and forth, remember he's part of that bench mob with the Raptors, and they said that Fred would call a film meeting. Fred, not the coaches asking Fred to do it, but Fred calling in that bench mob saying, hey, we got to do better. I didn't like the way we did this. And not just we, like me too, I got to do better. But here's a guy that's what a point guard does, right? That's a point guard leads. A point guard takes charge. A point guard is not afraid to say, okay, we all have to do this, and let's hear it here. We're going to go sit down and do this. And what kind of respect do you get from your teammates when you're a player calling a meeting and guys are in there going, okay, I'm in?
To me, something that stands out a little bit here too, to everybody's point, and the way that he's kind of fit in seamlessly with this team. I was having a conversation just a couple of days ago on a radio show with Jose Calderon. And I don't know if this is a fair example or not. You guys can tell me if I'm wrong. But it just hit me listening right now. You think of a young Fred VanVleet coming into a team that already has an established Kyle Lowry, and yet Fred VanVleet found a way to carve out a role for himself to make him as important as almost any other player on this team, to the point where he's even a guy that's starting in second halves of games in the finals last year, and where the Raptors would be in their playoff run and their finals run last year without a Fred VanVleet. And to use that comparison with Calderon, I don't mean this in a negative way by any means, but over the years, think about how the Raptors were trying to find that right combination, whether it was when Calderon came in with Mike James, and then there was the Calderon and TJ Ford, and then, you know, obviously Calderon with Kyle Lowry, and there was a Jarrett Jack in the middle of all that too, where you're always just trying to find that right combination. Who's the starter? Who's the backup? Who's the lead dog? Who's playing less minutes? But yet Fred VanVleet, we don't talk about that with Kyle Lowry right now, because they're both equally important. Lowry is clearly the starter, the veteran leader of this team, but Fred VanVleet, because of how good he is as important, whether he's running the second unit or whether he's on the floor as a second guard playing off the ball or on the ball, and allowing Lowry to play off the ball in a 1-2 punch and a tandem. And that just, to me, speaks to how good he is in all of the ways we've discussed, that he's been able to carve out such an important key role and a key cog to this team in a very short amount of time.
Jonesy, and it really all started with the bench mob and that bench mob mentality, that he really became a leader of that group.
We're in a day and age where, I mean, even now, recently, guys have declared that they're going straight to the G League, and they're coming right out of high school. And we were at a point where if a kid stayed in school 3 or 4 years, it was almost like something was wrong with them. And it's always been my contention is, if you look back in the day before we had the one and dones, we had guys staying in school for 4 years, and they mature a little bit, they learn the game, and when they come to the NBA, they learn the NBA game. They've already got a semblance of how to use their free time, whether it be in school or practice or whatever. And then I look at Fred, and the first guy to tell me, look out, keep an eye out on Fred VanVleet, was Antonio Davis, former Raptor Antonio Davis, because Fred played AAU ball with his son when he was traded to Chicago in that area. And he took a team that, you know, they were a good team in Wichita State, but between he and Ron Baker, as we said, got them to the Final Four. You don't forget how to be a good player. If you have leadership qualities, they're going to come out, and it comes out with that bench group. And you can bet, and Nick Nurse and Dwayne Casey said when they decided they were going to change their style, they started working with the young guys right away. And Fred was an integral part of that. Long before Lowry and DeRozan and all those guys in that year got onto the new system, the young guys were working at it, and Fred was the leader of that group. And again, it speaks to his ability, his self-confidence. You started this episode, Maddie, with bet on yourself. He knows what's inside him, and eventually it's going to come out, as it has now, and show everybody what he's all about. Jonesy, I think you're right on the nose. It's funny, I did an appearance with Fred a few months ago, and I asked them the question, who were your influences? Like, because whoever they are, they're brilliant people. Like, Coach, when you watch Fred VanVleet, you look at him and you say, this guy's been coached. Like, this guy gets it. he knows how to play. And I joke with him all the time that, you're probably going to end up making way too much money and you're not going to want to deal with the nonsense of coaching. But there is no question in my mind when I look at a guy like Fred VanVleet, he could be Jason Kidd or a Ty Lue or someone like that, or Mark Jackson, a point guard who became an NBA head coach. And I'm probably missing a lot of names. I know I am. But I see a guy like Fred VanVleet when he retires from playing, putting his time in as an assistant, and then clearly being a guy that could be one of the 30 guys that walks the sideline as an NBA head coach. He has that kind of makeup. But when you look at the fundamental base that he had when he got to Toronto, and the word that scouts always use, that's the most important thing, is what's the guy's makeup? His makeup is a beautiful thing.
For people that haven't seen it, and I'm sure hardcore Raptor fans no doubt have, but go back on YouTube and find Fred VanVleet's speech at his draft party after he wasn't selected. Because if I'm not mistaken, that's essentially when Bet on Yourself was born, when he used that phrase in his speech. And for everything we're talking about, leadership, maturity, just showing his character, which then translates on the floor as well. Here's a kid who has a draft party, stands up in front of friends and family and a community that's all cheering him on after not getting drafted and saying, I just worked out for 18 teams in 30 days. I went on the tour. And yeah, it's disappointing that I didn't get drafted, but I'm going to bet on myself. I'm not going down to the D League or the G League. I'm going to find a contract. I'm going to find the team. And then I think that drive and determination is what he ultimately brings into the camp to turn the heads of Leo and Jeff Weltman and all of us and everybody else and ultimately carve out this world that we've now discussed. I think that maturity at a young age in that moment to be able to stand up in front of everybody and say, it's okay, I've still got this, I believe in myself, that just showed it right there.
Sherm, when you think about the growth of Fred VanVleet, and we talked about his leadership on the bench mob, there's an immense amount of respect that you get within the room. And then all of a sudden, it allows you to not only be a leader with respect to the bench mob, but also within the framework of the team. And I don't know if many people realize how much of a leader he is within this Raptor group, because his voice is heard because of the respect level that he has in the room.
Well, the interesting thing about leadership to me is the best leaders know when to follow. And Fred VanVleet did a great job understanding that he had Kyle Lowry there. He knew he had a bona fide star in the NBA. He understood that he was going to take marching orders from Kyle. But in his moments where he was needed to step up in the leadership department, he stepped into that with confidence and did a great job understanding his role. And that comes with a guy who's been through some stuff, a guy who understands how to communicate, understands what each player needs in order to be comfortable and to be successful. And Fred's leadership style is so consistent. And we all know this, whether it's coaching, whether it's players, whether it's the job you're at, you want consistency from leadership. You want leaders that are going to be consistent. And Fred brings that. And you think about it, not only did he show leadership at times when he was required to, now a guy like Kyle is looking for that leadership from a guy like Fred. He wants that ability to have another guy on the floor that commands that respect, that he can ride shotgun with, and they both can run the team. And, everybody said, how is Nick Nurse going to play these two small guards to start games? Well, when you have that kind of leadership between two guys that has the command of their team, they're going to get the job done. And Fred, to me, has done more than just advance his position as a player in the Raptor organization. He's become one of the ultimate leaders for the squad. And to the point of playing in a winning organization, that's even a tougher goal to achieve when you walk into an organization that is already winning before you got there, to command that kind of respect. He stepped in and he got that right away.
And also, you talk about respect from your teammates. You think about some of the struggles he did have in the playoffs. How did he react? If you were looking at Fred, would you know that he hadn't made a shot? Would you know that by the way he's defending that he's struggling offensively? No. I mean, this guy played hard, and when he had to make a big shot, even though he hadn't made any shots leading up to that, did he make it? Yes. And that you want respect from your guys. Go through your struggles like a man, and that's exactly what Fred did. And then again, he just figured things out. And then if you flash forward to this season, remember Kyle Lowry had that 10-game stretch he was out? Fred didn't just fill in. Fred, in my opinion, played at an all-star level. If Fred could have played for an extended period of time in that role, he would have been in the all-star game. Because if you could name me 2 or 3 other point guards in the league that were played any better during that stretch, I want to hear who they were.
Jonesy, there is a level of basketball IQ there that is apparent with Fred VanVleet. And I know I mentioned this earlier about, the offense, and we always love to talk about offense, but you also see it from a defensive standpoint as well, very much like Kyle Lowry.
Defenses try to go at Kyle and Fred, and they take it personally. They do. They take it personally in terms of defending their position, stopping people, being part of a good team defense, rebounding. Just for Raptor fans that haven't really watched that little nuance in the game, watch the rebounding by Fred. Like Kyle, he's right in there. He's, he'll close the space when a big guy has their man boxed out. He'll close the space on the back end, get the long rebounds. He's a tremendous, and again, I go back to his basketball IQ. He's a tremendous team defender, understanding where he has to be, when he has to be there in the rotation, and he does his best on the ball. As Eric said earlier, look at what Nick Nurse did in the finals last year. Every second half, because of the way that Fred was able to, you never stop a Steph Curry, but make it difficult for him and make him work. He was in the lineup. So it goes to both ends of the floor, Matty, for sure.
Hey, can I ask you guys a question? Where's the risk in going small in today's game when nobody wants to post you up anyway?
It's all the perimeter, Leo. You're right. Everybody's playing on the outside.
Hey, you look at Kyle and Fred, both of these guys can do big man clinics on how to keep guys out of the post anyway. They do it better than big guys. So how can a scout in today's NBA justify this guy's too small? It makes no sense.
Look at Kyle Lowry and Fred. They may be 2 of the best post defenders now in the league.
They should run a big thing camp.
Jack, I know you want to get in.
No, it's a great point, Leo, you bring up. And it's interesting, when you look at it, and we all know that Fred VanVleet's a free agent at the end of the year. We all hope that he stays in Toronto. If I'm a GM of another team, everyone sells this underdog story, which I think is great, and we've talked about his makeup. Let's be real, though. He's got big-time pro skills in a few areas. Number one, he's a plus shooter. He is a plus defender. And then all those other things you put into the ball of wax in terms of the makeup, this is a guy, to Leo's point, that could run your team. I mean, he is a starting player in the NBA on a winning team.
Eric Smith, there's also a point, too. There is a love affair between, I think, Fred and the fan base, right? I think people see themselves in Fred a little bit, right? Where you're like, hey, look at undrafted, and especially in a place like Toronto where, hardworking, doesn't matter the weather, you're going out there, you're showing up, and you're giving it your all. And people love Fred for that because that's what he does on a nightly basis.
You just hit the nail on the head, Matt. This city, for as much as, it loved Vince Carter and Chris Bosh and certainly Kawhi Leonard for 1 year, or it loved Jose Batista, it also loves John McDonald and Jerome Williams and Matt Bonner and Ty Domi, Wendell Clark, the gritty, the grimy, the grinders, the guys that just kind of have a little bit of sandpaper and edge to them. This city seems to love the workers more than they love the superstars sometimes. And Fred VanVleet is becoming a superstar, no doubt about it, or at least a star and a potential all-star. But he's still got that worker, that grinder mentality for all those traits and all those things that you just rhymed off, whether it be, not worrying about the weather or not worrying about his size and just the way he plays. And I think back to last year, and for all the love, understandably so, that we give to the Kawhi Leonard shot against the Sixers and, of course, winning the title in Game 6 and hoisting the trophy, what do we think of as well? We think of Fred VanVleet laying flat on his back with blood coming down his face, with his tooth on the floor. We think about him coming back for the next game with the bandage under his eye. We think about him hitting that big three and the screaming. That moment is as big as any of other moments that we saw in last year's playoff run.
Sherm, we'll wrap with you there. and you know this as a former player, you know, the whole idea, it's easy to say bet on yourself, but it's a lot harder every single night to do it, to go out there and prove yourself. And he's got that. He's got those intangibles, doesn't he? He's got that about him, and that's what makes him a special player.
A lot of people talk the talk, but when it comes to walking the walk, they get a bit wobbly. And Fred is not that guy at all. He talked about betting on himself and understanding, too, that, you know, he knows what he's bringing to the table. His job is to convince other people to understand what he's bringing to the table as value. It is, and I said this earlier, it is almost impossible to go to a veterans camp and make it. Then, not only to make that team, to be an integral part of their success early in your career. You come in as an invite to a veterans camp, the idea is you're going to fill a roster spot at best. The back end of the roster, you're going to be a practice guy. You're going to be that guy who, if something happens to somebody, you might get some time. Fred comes in, works at it, he becomes an integral part of their success. So, you know, there's nothing about Fred that you consider to be shaky. Everything is solid. He brings it every night. He works at it. He's going to be one of the hardest workers on the defensive end. Offensively, he's going to make great decision after great decision after great decision, and he just continues to instill confidence. So there's no question that Fred has the pedigree to be a quality player for a long time in this league. But the way that he went about it, the determined attitude, the consistency, the approach, everything about what Fred brought made you realize that this guy was quality from beginning to end, and he just continues to prove that.
Thank you all. Crew call, and we appreciate everybody out on the front lines, and we appreciate you taking the time to listen to us. See you next time.